Time didn't stop, just stopped keeping up. For 13 Earth years, the research station Halcyon Drift held stable orbit around a binary star system skirting the edge of a distant black hole, catalogued only as Vanta R53. Its role was quiet, observational. Map X-ray bursts, track gravitational lensing, log neutrino flux. The black hole itself remained passive, a silent punctuation mark against the stars. The crew called it the pupil, not because it resembled an eye, but because of what it did to light. It didn't pull, it absorbed. And around that silent center, time ran like water trapped in a glass spiral. At first, the station's clock aligned with Earth to the millisecond. Atomic sync protocols, quantum key validation, nothing out of phase. Days match days. Reports returned with timestamp integrity. Until one day, the signal from Halcyon arrived, off. Not by seconds, by hours. 3 minutes passed on board. But on Earth, 11 hours had elapsed. The clock hadn't stopped. It had simply slowed. The crew didn't notice. Not at first. Biological perception doesn't tick in gigahertz. Their conversations continued naturally. The air recyclers purred. The garden module blossomed on schedule. Sleep cycles, heartbeats, all the rhythms of human life continued as if time remained unbroken. But Earth saw the drift. And it wasn't linear. Each day the gap grew wider. By the second week, 1 minute on board equaled 4 hours on Earth. By the third week, the curve began accelerating, not like a malfunctioning clock, but like a logarithm folding in on itself. Something had changed. Not in the hardware. In the reality around the hardware. Gravitational time dilation wasn't new. Einstein predicted it. GPS satellites compensate for it. It's real, measurable, but never like this. The math broke past known thresholds. The Halcyon drift wasn't near enough to the event horizon to experience this level of dilation, unless its orbit had begun to decay inward without leaving a trace. No heat spike, no orbital drag, no warning, just a deepening of time. A slow dive into a clock that ticks once. While the universe races past in silence, one experiment was launched. A beacon pod, detached from Halcyon, was programmed to drop into a slightly wider orbit and transmit continuous timestamps. Its purpose was to measure gradient changes. It returned garbled, not corrupt, just temporally scrambled. Its last entry claimed the pod had been launched 42 minutes before it actually detached. Small error. But in physics, small is everything. Back on the station, the crew began feeling disjointed. Food lost its flavor. Sleep came too quickly. Their bodies aged correctly, but their reflections lagged. Sometimes, during window observation shifts, the black hole seemed larger, just slightly, as if its curve sharpened with each pass. But measurements denied it. The station wasn't moving, but perhaps time was. Orbit became a spiral. Spiral became a tunnel. And tunnels, in the realm of black holes, lead not through space, but through chronology. Earth scientists revised their models. They suggested the station might be caught in a relativistic echo, a shallow eddy in the black hole's frame-dragging effect. Not inside the event horizon. Not yet. But close enough to feel its influence as something more than pull. Closer to permission. Halcyon's time wasn't just slowing. It was being curated, sculpted into an experience where each moment carried different weight. Like gravity, but aimed at reality itself. The crew was instructed to remain calm. Continue operations. Log everything. They did. But their logs began to repeat. Identical phrasing. Identical typos. Entire status reports duplicated word for word, days apart. And yet none of the crew remembered copying them. One line, about adjusting oxygen mix in the garden module, appeared 3 times over 3 weeks, written by 3 different officers. Each believed they wrote it once. Each denied the others could have done it. Time aboard the Halcyon drift wasn't just slow. It was fracturing. Not visibly, not audibly, just beneath thought. Just enough to be wrong. And so, the clock was left to drift. No correction. No forceful sink. It ticked quietly on a wall panel above the airlock, counting a time no longer connected to Earth or to the body or to the stars beyond. A new kind of time. Not universal. Not absolute. Black hole time. It began with a pulse. A routine calibration signal. Just a digital handshake, sent from Earth to the Halcyon drift every 12 hours to confirm alignment, orbital speed, and station health. It had been sent thousands of times. Always received. Always acknowledged. Until one morning the signal arrived, early. Not to Earth. To the station. They logged it. Confirmed the checksum. Echoed it back. And then, 12 hours later, the original signal was sent. From Earth. Perfect match. Time stamped exactly when it should have been. But the station had already received it. As if time had cracked open and the message had crawled through sideways, brushing past causality like a breeze through fabric. First they blamed cosmic latency, packet reflection, quantum decoherence in the entangled relay. But then it happened again. The next pulse arrived 6 minutes early, then 31, then 4 hours before Earth sent it. Each time the checksum was exact, the packet unaltered. They weren't getting echoes. They were getting the future, not guesses, perfect replicas arriving too soon. Then the logs changed. One systems engineer noticed a strange entry in the station's onboard AI. Playback queue loaded. Audio file, mission log 782C. Status, scheduled. The problem? That file hadn't been recorded yet. Commander Raynaud, listed as the speaker, had not made log 782C. She hadn't even drafted it. But when she finally did, 2 days later, every word matched the earlier playback. Intonation, pause length, error in phrasing. It was all there. Her future had already happened. More anomalies followed. The water recycling system reported filtration protocols that hadn't run yet. Security cameras captured the mess hall before anyone entered it. And worst of all, the crew began dreaming events that would occur days later, with perfect recall. A dropped mug, static glitch, power flicker in hydroponics. Each moment, once dismissed as déjà vu, unfolded again, exactly. The station was no longer receiving time as a river. It was caught in a tidal, swirling inside itself. Not repeating, not looping, reflecting. A specialist back on Earth reviewed the Event Horizon's local frame using simulations. Her conclusion chilled the team. The black hole wasn't generating new gravitational waves. It was forming constructive interference patterns in its own curvature. In simple terms, it wasn't just bending time. It was folding time onto itself like origami. Events didn't follow one another. They began sitting next to one another, side by side, forward, backward, parallel. And the Halcyon drift was caught inside the crease. More logs appeared out of order. The AI began re-indexing audio journals. Files from week 17 appeared next to week 9. Video footage showed conversations that hadn't yet happened, with background elements that didn't exist, until they did. The station's memory began to behave like a hall of mirrors, fragmented, redundant, echoing moments back at the crew before they could live them. No one could say what day it was anymore. Not because they lost count, but because every day was beginning to blend into the others. A mission meant to monitor the black hole had become a symphony of feedback. They weren't observers. They were part of the loop. One crew member, Atria Selden, began recording her own logs in handwriting, refusing to use digital systems. She would write notes, seal them, and leave them under her bunk. But sometimes she'd find entries she hadn't written yet, already waiting. Dates that hadn't come. Questions she hadn't thought to ask. Her own handwriting, answering her before she spoke. Time on Halcyon was no longer trusted. Every memory required witnesses. Every witness became a ghost of a future self. Eventually, Earth stopped sending calibration pulses. Not out of fear, but because they were now receiving replies from the station before transmissions had been sent. One control officer joked that the station had become a causal inbox, messages appearing before anyone knew what they were for. But it wasn't funny, because one of the earliest arrivals was a full mission log titled, "Final Entry, Halcyon Drift Descent." No one had written it, no one had recorded it, but it was there, perfectly dated, perfectly transcribed, and still days away. In the last moments of certainty, the crew made a choice. They would stop recording, not to hide, but to preserve their minds, to prevent the loop from finishing itself. The feedback wasn't killing them, it was pre-living them, and nothing could be more terrifying than knowing how your next moment ends, before you even think it. So the station quieted, the logs thinned, but the loop continued, a rhythm, a whisper, an echo of existence sent backward to meet the present, not a message, condition. They weren't trapped in orbit. They were trapped in context. It was never meant to be a rescue. Not really. It was an experiment in hope, an attempt to create distance from something that no longer obeyed the language of distance. The Halcyon drift had gone quiet, not dark. The lights still shimmered across its hull. Signals still pulsed, but the meaning behind them had collapsed. Time wasn't progressing on board. It was folding in on itself, replaying logs, predicting moments, echoing voices before they were spoken. To Earth, the station was becoming unreadable. To the crew, it was becoming unlivable. So they devised a plan. One astronaut would be sent home. Not all of them, just one. Test case. Control variable. Someone to measure against. A pod was prepped with extreme shielding, an onboard AI stripped of predictive subroutines, and most importantly, a clock. Isolated. Untouched by Halcyon. Disconnected from all sync protocols. That clock would be truth. Or, if not truth, at least a witness. They chose Lieutenant Kale. Quiet. Grounded. A systems engineer trained in deep solitude. He volunteered without hesitation. The pod detached on mission day 97. Flight cameras recorded it clearly. Kale strapped in, visor down, heart rate steady. He drifted, accelerated, fell backward into Earth's gravity well, and disappeared beyond the system's light lag. For Earth, 2 days passed. Then, something re-entered low orbit. The capsule bore the same identification, HiPod 4, same radiation scars, same hull frequency. It was Kale's. Recovery teams moved quickly. What they found inside broke every model of time Earth had ever trusted. The man they recovered remembered the launch. He recalled strapping in, firing thrusters, running post-attachment diagnostics. He remembered Earth pulling closer in his viewport. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was the black box. When engineers played back the internal camera feed, it didn't match Kale's memory. Not at all. Because the camera showed something impossible. Kale inside the pod staring outward, at the Halcyon drift, and through the station's main viewport. Another Kale floating in zero gravity, preparing the launch. Not a hallucination. 2 versions. Same voice, same face, same vitals. The Kale inside the pod was watching a moment that hadn't happened yet. And the Kale inside the station was acting out a moment that, according to the pod, already had. Mission Control staggered under the implications. They ran quantum checksum verifications on the footage. No tampering. No interference. The data was clean. 2 identical time signatures. 2 observers. 1 timeline, fractured along the curve of descent. The isolated clock told its own story. It had not lost time. It had gained it. When compared to Earth's clocks, Kale's pod had experienced 12 extra hours that no one could account for. No solar interference. No gravitational slingshot. Just time leaking sideways. Like the pod hadn't fallen through a vacuum. It had slid across a temporal seam. A crack where 2 realities brushed past one another like strangers in a fog. Theories poured in. Some said the black hole's space-time distortion had multiplied probability paths, and Kale had touched 2 simultaneously. Others suggested the Halcyon's causal feedback had bent return trajectories into nonlinear collapse. But the simplest explanation, the one no one dared publish, was this: the pod did not return to Earth. It returned to an Earth that hadn't launched it yet. Cale began to dream strangely. He said the stars outside the station looked different now. Sharper, like they remembered things. He said time felt wider, like a hallway with mirrors, where every step echoed forward and backward at once. And most unsettling of all, he began finishing other people's sentences, not by guessing, but by remembering them. On Earth, public reports were filtered. Cale's return was classified as successful. No mention of the doubled footage. No acknowledgement of the paradox. He was debriefed, examined, kept under observation. But nothing could explain the black box. Because even after a full system reset, the capsule's AI would occasionally display a string of text unprompted. Replaying memory. Launch event. Waiting for sync. It never synced. 'Cause there was nothing to sync with. The most disturbing data came 3 weeks later. A secondary satellite, still positioned near the Halcyon drift, recorded a thermal anomaly. Silhouette, human-sized, floating just outside the station's primary viewport. Was it Cale? Was it memory? Was it future? No one could say. Because now there were 2 records of the same man. One seated safely on Earth. The other still watching himself leave. And neither could be proven false. The pod hadn't fallen through space. It had fallen sideways in time. Not into the past. Not into the future. But into the space between them. Where memory, identity, and observation bleed into each other. And return is never clean. Only a recursive. First it was just a shimmer. A flicker in the station's reflection, like heat over a horizon, where metal seemed less solid and shadows bent the wrong way. Cameras caught it briefly, then lost it. Glitch, perhaps. A memory artifact. But then the shimmer became shape. Not once, not twice, but again and again. Whole sections of the Halcyon drift appeared twice, then 3 times, layered faintly over themselves like misplaced transparencies. The science bay. The solar node. Even the observation dome, each version just slightly out of sync, slightly out of phase. Slightly wrong. In one version, the hydroponics garden bore red leaves instead of green. In another, the AI terminal interface used glyphs no one recognized. In yet another, Cale stood at the window, wearing a uniform never issued. The ship wasn't glitching. It was overlapping. Instrument logs fractured. Internal clocks fell into disagreement. Room temperature changed depending on where you stood. Crew members entered corridors only to emerge into rooms that hadn't existed the day before. And then, worst of all, some began hearing echoes of conversations they hadn't yet had. Not fragments, full exchanges. They would answer before being asked. Ask things no one had told them. It wasn't déjà vu. It was memory collapsing inward. Earth could no longer make sense of the telemetry. Every data stream showed multiple timelines. Sensor readings returned values for 2, sometimes 3 realities at once, as if the station existed in layers, stacked like pages in a closed book, all bleeding ink into each other. One stream showed a power failure. Another showed full systems operational. Third showed no station at all. The Halcyon drift wasn't in danger. It was in superposition. Each version of it circling the event horizon in a slightly different loop. Some faster, some slower, some already finished. A physicist reviewing the telemetry called it memory gravity. He proposed that time near the black hole had begun to fold backward, but not just for events, for identity. The crew weren't losing their minds. They were becoming entangled with alternate selves. Not mirrors, not doppelgangers. Timelines pressing together. And no one knew which version would last. Cale began fading. Not vanishing. Phasing. His vitals still broadcast. His voice still answered. But occasionally, the sensors would fail to detect him for minutes at a time, only to pick him up again mid-breath, mid-sentence, with no memory of interruption. His memories no longer aligned with the others. He recalled alternate meals, different arguments, a mission log entry no one else remembered making, but which appeared hours later, word for word, exactly as he described it. Cale wasn't drifting into the past or future. He was drifting into parallel completion. The crew made one last attempt to reach Earth. They hard-coded a message into the external beacon, broadcast by light rather than radio. But what Earth received wasn't the message they sent. It was a message from 4 days earlier, and then a message from a future date, and then silence. The Halcyon drift signal fractured into a strobe, bright, broken, incoherent, and then flatline. No explosion, no breach, just gone. As if the station had slipped behind a curtain and forgotten how to be observed. In the archives, Earth preserved the last clean visual from the station's own external cams. It showed the black hole's event horizon, rimmed in starlight. But between the lens flare and cosmic background, a faint ripple was visible, just off-center. Silhouette, not a ship, not a figure, just the suggestion of form. Like someone had stood at the edge of existence and let all timelines wash through them, reducing their edges until only gravity remembered them. Some say Halcyon collapsed into the singularity. Others argue it was never lost. It simply became part of the black hole's memory. A whisper, loop, a spiral of selves echoing across the boundary where time no longer flows, but pools. And so the question remains, is a black hole the ultimate time machine? The answer depends. If you're asking whether you can escape the present, then yes, fall close enough to the event horizon, and time for you slows to a whisper, while the universe outside screams ahead. You could fall for hours, while the stars live and die above. But if you ask whether you can go back, or steer, or return, then the answer is quieter. A black hole isn't a time machine. It's a bottleneck, a one-way doorway into places where time stops asking what comes next. And what's left behind is not you. Not exactly. Just the possibility of you. Stretched thin. Reflected. Observed by a universe that no longer needs clocks to remember.